When Sophie Cunningham said, "I'm tired of our league" in her exit interview, nobody expected what would come next. A full-scale player revolt that's threatening to tear the WNBA apart from the inside. And at the center of it all, Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, who's now facing the biggest crisis of her career as we head deeper into 2025. But here's what makes this different from every other league controversy you've heard about. This isn't just about bad calls or missed opportunities anymore. Players are now openly questioning whether the people running the WNBA even understand basketball. And when your own athletes start saying that, you've got a problem that goes way beyond fixing a few officiating mistakes. If you're as invested in this drama as we are, smash that like button and drop a comment telling us whose side you're on. Sophie and the players, or Kathy Engelbert's leadership team? Because this divide is only getting deeper. Let's rewind to where this powder keg really started smoking. Sophie Cunningham sat down for what should have been a routine exit interview after the Phoenix Mercury's season ended. Standard stuff, right? Thank the fans, talk about what went wrong, promise to come back stronger next year. Except Sophie had other plans. She came loaded with receipts and zero interest in playing nice with league leadership. "I'm just tired of our league," she said, and you could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Not the kind from playing 82 games, but the bone-deep weariness of fighting a system that refuses to listen. She didn't stop there either. Sophie went straight for the jugular, calling out people in positions of power who might be really great business people, but they don't know about basketball. Translation: the suits running the WNBA are making decisions without understanding what actually happens on the court. And here's the kicker that nobody saw coming. Sophie revealed that NBA players, actual NBA stars, have been reaching out to WNBA players expressing shock at how terribly they're being treated. Think about that for a second. The men's league, which has its own issues with officiating and management, is looking at the WNBA and feeling bad for them. When your counterpart league is sending sympathy texts, you know things have gone completely off the rails. But that wasn't the whole story, because Sophie was actually the second major star to go nuclear on league leadership in the span of just weeks. Napheesa Collier dropped what can only be described as a tactical nuke during her own exit interview earlier. The Minnesota Lynx star didn't ease into her criticism or couch it in diplomatic language. She looked directly into the camera and said, "The WNBA has the worst leadership in the world." Not bad leadership, not struggling leadership, the absolute worst on planet Earth. Collier's rant wasn't some emotional outburst after a tough loss either. It was calculated, specific, and devastating. She talked about sitting across from Kathy Engelbert personally and asking how the commissioner planned to address the officiating disaster that's been plaguing games. Engelbert's response? Well, only the losers complain about the refs. Imagine being told that by your own commissioner when you're raising legitimate safety concerns about how games are being called. But it gets worse. Collier also asked about the pay disparity for rookies like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Buchers, who are driving massive revenue increases but making pennies compared to what they're generating. Engelbert's answer to that concern? She allegedly told Collier that Caitlin should be grateful she makes $16 million off the court because without the platform that the WNBA gives her, she wouldn't make anything. Let that sink in for a moment. The commissioner of the WNBA just claimed that Caitlin Clark owes her entire marketability to the league, completely ignoring that Clark became a cultural phenomenon during her Iowa years before ever stepping foot in a WNBA arena. The woman broke NCAA viewership records, sold out arenas across the country, and became must-see TV while still in college. But sure, Kathy, she should be thankful the WNBA allows her to exist. And if that wasn't insulting enough, Collier said Engelbert told players they should be on their knees thanking their lucky stars for the media rights deal she negotiated. On their knees, thanking their lucky stars. For a deal that still pays WNBA players a fraction of what their male counterparts make, despite record-breaking viewership and attendance numbers throughout 2024 and into this current season, what happened next would shock everyone, because this wasn't going to stay contained to just two angry players. The media erupted. And we're not talking about niche sports blogs or WNBA-specific podcasts. Major mainstream voices started weighing in, and they did not hold back. Stephen A. Smith, one of the most prominent personalities in all of sports media, absolutely torched Engelbert's response to the controversy. He called her handling of the situation weak and openly questioned whether she should keep her job. Stephen A. doesn't usually go that hard on league commissioners, but he made it clear that Engelbert's leadership has been a failure. Scott Van Pelt piled on during his show, pointing out that these frustrations have been building for years, and the league office has consistently failed to address them. Van Pelt specifically called out the disconnect between player performance and league vision, noting that the WNBA is experiencing unprecedented growth in popularity, but somehow still can't figure out how to protect and compensate the athletes driving that growth. Even ESPN's Around the Horn dedicated multiple segments to the controversy, with panelists debating whether Engelbert can survive this level of public criticism from her own players. The consensus? Things look bad, really bad, when you've got former players turned analysts like Lisa Leslie saying there's a leadership gap at the top of the league. You know the problem isn't just perception. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because current players started speaking up too. A'ja Wilson, the reigning MVP and arguably the face of the WNBA right now, made comments about players not being heard by league leadership. She didn't name Engelbert directly, but the implication was crystal clear. Breanna Stewart posted cryptic messages on social media that fans immediately connected to the Collier and Cunningham controversies. Sabrina Ionescu liked several tweets criticizing the commissioner's response. These aren't fringe players with nothing to lose. These are the superstars, the faces of franchises, the women who sell tickets and jerseys. The player revolt isn't coming from malcontents or struggling veterans looking for attention. It's coming from the very top of the talent pyramid, which makes it exponentially more dangerous for Engelbert and the league office. And speaking of dangerous, let's talk about what this means for 2026, because that's when everything could potentially explode. The current collective bargaining agreement expires after next season, which means players and ownership will need to negotiate a new deal. Under normal circumstances, these negotiations are tense, but ultimately productive. Both sides want the league to succeed, so they find common ground and move forward. But these aren't normal circumstances anymore. Not even close. Collier explicitly mentioned the CBA negotiations in her interview, and the subtext was impossible to miss. She's laying the groundwork for a potential work stoppage, a strike, a lockout. Whatever you want to call it, the threat is real and it's on the table now. If players feel like leadership doesn't value them, doesn't listen to them, and actively dismisses their concerns, why would they agree to another CBA that maintains the status quo? The timing of these interviews wasn't accidental either. Collier and Cunningham are smart, media-savvy athletes who understand how to control a narrative. By going public with their frustrations now, more than a year before CBA negotiations begin, they're building public support for their position. They're making sure fans understand that if there's a work stoppage, it's because leadership failed, not because players are being greedy or unreasonable. And here's the thing that should terrify the league office. The players have leverage now in a way they never have before. Caitlin Clark changed everything. Her rookie season in 2024 shattered every viewership record the WNBA had. Games featuring the Indiana Fever became must-watch television, with ratings sometimes tripling or quadrupling what they'd been in previous years. Attendance spiked across the league, not just in Indianapolis. Merchandise sales exploded. Sponsors who'd never looked at the WNBA before suddenly wanted in on the action. Now, as we're into the 2025 season, that momentum has continued despite Clark dealing with some injury issues that have kept her out of several games recently. The league is more popular than it's ever been, which means a work stoppage would be catastrophic in a way it wouldn't have been 5 years ago. You can't build all this momentum, finally break through to mainstream consciousness, and then shut down because you can't figure out how to treat your players fairly. The damage would be irreversible. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're covering every twist and turn of this story as it develops. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates. But let's get back to Kathy Engelbert's response because it reveals everything wrong with how this situation is being handled. After Collier's interview went viral and Sophie Cunningham's comments added fuel to the fire, the league office issued a statement. It was exactly what you'd expect from a corporate PR department trying to make a problem go away without actually addressing it. Lots of words about respecting player voices, appreciating their passion, and being proud of the league's growth. Zero acknowledgement of specific complaints. No mention of officiating problems. Nothing about the insulting comments Collier attributed to Engelbert personally. It was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while using a lot of words to do it. And players, fans, and media saw right through it immediately. You can't dismiss urgent concerns with corporate speak and expect people to move on. The response confirmed exactly what Collier had accused Engelbert of in the first place: being out of touch and unwilling to engage with real problems. What's particularly damning is that Engelbert didn't even attempt to dispute Collier's account of their private conversation. She didn't say, "I never told players to be on their knees thanking anyone," or "That's not what I meant about Caitlin Clark." The non-denial denial spoke volumes. Either those conversations happened exactly as Collier described them, or Engelbert doesn't think denying them would help her case. Neither option looks good. And then there's the officiating crisis that's been the elephant in the room for years now. This isn't a new problem. Players have been complaining about inconsistent officiating for as long as the WNBA has existed. But it reached a breaking point during the 2024 season and has continued into this year. Games were being decided by questionable calls in crucial moments. Dangerous plays were going uncalled, leading to injuries. The physicality was getting out of control, with some matchups looking more like hockey games than basketball. Coaches were getting fined for criticizing officials in post-game interviews, which only made things worse because it created the perception that the league was more interested in protecting refs than fixing the actual problems. Players started openly questioning calls during games, which never happened before because everyone understood that was a quick way to get technical fouls. But they'd reached a point where they didn't care anymore. The frustration had boiled over. Sophie Cunningham specifically mentioned this in her interview. She talked about how players are agreeing on the court because of how awful the officials are, meaning opposing players who should be competitors are instead commiserating about how badly games are being called. When rivals are united in their criticism of officiating, you've got a systemic problem that goes beyond individual missed calls. The league's response? Essentially nothing. Some refs were downgraded or removed from playoff games, but there was no comprehensive overhaul, no acknowledgement that the system needed serious reform. Just more of the same, which is exactly what has players so fed up. What makes this even more complicated is the Caitlin Clark factor, and how her treatment has become a flashpoint in this entire controversy. Clark's rookie season was historic for the WNBA, but it was also brutal for her personally. She faced an unprecedented level of physical play that many observers felt crossed the line into targeting. The infamous Chennedy Carter hip check that went viral wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of aggressive, sometimes dangerous plays directed at Clark that officials seemed reluctant to call. The league's handling of that situation became a microcosm of everything wrong with WNBA leadership. Instead of protecting their biggest star and the player driving record viewership, they downplayed the incidents and acted like criticism of the physical play was somehow disrespectful to veteran players. They prioritized avoiding controversy over ensuring player safety. and it backfired spectacularly. Now in 2025, even though Clark has been dealing with injuries that have kept her out of some games recently, the conversation hasn't died down. If anything, it's intensified because players are connecting her treatment to the broader leadership failures that Collier and Cunningham are calling out. The same dismissive attitude that led to Clark getting beat up on the court without adequate protection is the same attitude that has Engelbert telling players to be grateful for whatever scraps they're given. And this brings us to the real question that nobody in the league office wants to answer. What happens if players decide they've had enough? The nuclear option is a strike or lockout during CBA negotiations. But there are other pressure points players could exploit before it gets to that. They could start being more vocal in interviews, turning every post-game press conference into a referendum on league leadership. They could organize social media campaigns highlighting specific failures and building public support for their positions. They could refuse to participate in league promotional events or All-Star Weekend activities. Basically, players have a ton of options for making Engelbert's life miserable without actually stopping play. And given how angry they clearly are, it's not hard to imagine them using every tool at their disposal. The league is also facing a delicate balancing act with expansion. There's been talk of adding new teams, which would normally be a sign of health and growth. But how do you expand when your current players are openly revolting against leadership? What message does it send to potential expansion cities and investors when the face of your league is telling the media that leadership is the worst in the world? Here's something else that's not getting enough attention: the generational divide this is creating. Older players who came up in an era when the WNBA was fighting for survival tend to be more cautious about criticizing leadership publicly. They remember when the league almost folded, when teams were contracting instead of expanding, when nobody was watching, and sponsors were scarce. They're grateful the league exists at all, which makes them more willing to tolerate problems. But younger players, especially those who came into the league during this recent boom period, don't have that same fear. They see the massive ratings, the sold-out arenas, the mainstream media coverage, and they rightfully ask why they're still being treated like they should be grateful for scraps. They have leverage and they know it, which is why you're seeing players like Collier and Cunningham speak so boldly. This generational split could become a major factor in CBA negotiations. If older players are willing to accept a deal that younger stars view as inadequate, you could see serious fractures within the players' union itself, and that's exactly the kind of divide that league leadership would try to exploit to get a favorable deal. So, where does this leave us as we head deeper into the 2025 season? The WNBA is simultaneously experiencing its greatest popularity and its deepest internal crisis. Viewership is up, attendance is strong, and mainstream America is paying attention in ways they never have before. But the players who are driving that success are openly questioning whether the people running the league are competent to lead it into the future. Kathy Engelbert is facing a crisis of confidence that extends far beyond a few unhappy players. Major media figures are questioning her leadership. Current superstars are publicly criticizing her decisions. The looming CBA negotiations threaten to expose just how deep the divide between players and management really is. And here's the thing that should worry everyone who cares about the WNBA. This is entirely preventable. The solutions aren't complicated. Listen to players when they raise concerns about officiating. Pay them fairly, relative to the revenue they're generating. Stop acting like they should be grateful for the opportunity to play and start treating them like the elite professional athletes they are. Hire people in leadership positions who actually understand basketball, not just business. None of this is rocket science, but it requires humility, adaptability, and a willingness to admit when you've gotten things wrong. Based on the league's response so far, those qualities seem to be in short supply at the top. The next few months are going to be crucial. Will Engelbert make meaningful changes to address player concerns, or will she dig in and hope this blows over? Will more players speak out, or will there be pressure to fall in line and stop making waves? Will the media continue covering this story? Or will it fade as the season progresses and other narratives take over? One thing's for certain, the players aren't backing down. Sophie Cunningham didn't sound like someone who was venting frustration and would move on. She sounded like someone who's done playing nice and is ready to fight for real change. Napheesa Collier didn't hold back anything in her criticism, which suggests she's prepared for whatever fallout comes from speaking truth to power. This is a watershed moment for the WNBA. Either leadership steps up and addresses these concerns in meaningful ways, or we're headed for a confrontation that could seriously damage the league just as it's reaching new heights of popularity. The stakes couldn't be higher, and everyone involved knows it. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Is Kathy Engelbert the problem, or are players being unreasonable? Should the commissioner step down, or does she deserve a chance to fix things? And most importantly, do you think we're headed for a work stoppage in 2026? We want to hear your take on this developing situation. And don't forget to subscribe so you catch every update as this story continues to unfold. This is far from over, and we'll be here covering every twist and turn.